A little bit about us. The Black Trans Task Force was formed to look at the problem of violence against the Black trans community, specifically and especially, against trans femmes and women. And so, we're looking at in a sort of hierarchy of needs way of all of those aspects that contribute to violence. So that includes us doing a community survey. It includes us reaching out to community partners, and also looking at the different aspects. So, houselessness and access to health care, and et cetera, and down the list, and figuring out how can we get to the place where we can do have some preventative measures from some of the, for some sense of protection for our community. And I think at this time, maybe introduce the task force. My name is Jalen Scott, she, her. I'm the co-executive director of Lavender Rights Project, and also a member of the task force. It's good to meet all of you.
Hi, I'm Scarlett, she, her pronouns. I am an artist and witch based down in Olympia, Washington. In addition to being a member of the Black Trans Task Force, I organize with Heart Spark Press down here in Olympia. And we help the trans femme and then the greater trans community down in this area. Right now that's mostly with the mobile food bank. So that is some of the work that I do. And I'll pass it off to Nicole.
My name's Nicole, she, her pronouns. I'm here in Seattle, and I moved here about 3 years ago from Dallas, where I was a member of many different activist organizations that were specifically set up for the trans community, and would at times go down to Austin, for example, to fight against or fight for different bills that came up within the Texas legislature regarding trans folks and their families, and so on and so forth. So it's one of those where, also as a Marine Corps veteran myself, there are many different facets that I have within the community. So I try to help whoever, whenever I can. Without further, I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to Renee.
Hello, y'all. I'm Renee Giroux. I use she and they pronouns. I am originally from Everett, Washington, currently residing in Seattle. Besides being on the task force, I am a DJ and musician. I've been working with racialized LGBTQ populations professionally since 2013 in various capacities. I have background doing youth arts and HIV research with those communities, so kind of varied within the field. And besides that work, I'm also the founder of Darkness Seattle, artist collective and event series for queer and trans people of color, and the creator of @Pay Black Trans Women, a resource on Twitter that boosts crowdfunding for Black trans women and trans femmes. Ganesha, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Hey, thanks, Renee. I'm Ganesha Gold Buffalo, pronouns it, it's, itself. I'm a local multidisciplinary performance artist and organizer from Tennessee, currently operating out of Seattle. And I work with organizations Uprooted and Rising, as well as Black Trans Task Force Washington, and just really glad to be here today. Little bit about my background is I've been organizing for around 10 years now. Started originally in Tennessee, and eventually was able to take that work to Massachusetts, and then other parts of that area of the country. Went into upstate New York, Traveled a bit around the South, and then I served at Standing Rock as well during the pipeline opposition there, and made my way back home for a bit. Then did a lot of work in New Mexico with ceremony, Indigenous ceremony, and the Indigenous communities around there, helping them organize, and then moved to Seattle right after that. And I've just been working with the community around garnering and collectivizing resources for the most marginalized, particularly Black trans folk and disabled folk in the area. And that revolves around the majority of my work now. But yeah, just grateful to be here. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, my name is Randy. I use she, her, goddess as pronouns. I am a choreographer and educator, born Seattle, South King County, kind of raised, I'm just Washington light, I guess. I am part of a collective, AU Collective. It's a 501c3 dance organization committed to centering women, queer folks, and people of color at the forefront of everything that we do. We're doing a relief fund for COVID for immediate needs as far as like groceries, medical needs for those who can't quite qualify for all of these relief funds out here. We'll be starting that back up in June. I do a lot of work with CD Forum, Central District Forum for Arts and Ideas as a performer and as an activist. I do Living Room Podcast. I'm known primarily outside of being a Black Trans Task Force member as a teaching artist and dance educator. Also, I guess I'm gonna, on the last one, if during this webinar series, you have any access needs as far as like some of the information might be a little hard to take in or some things come up, you can either personal message me or Scarlett in the chat, and we'll definitely take care of you. And if you have any questions that come up, we definitely encourage you to leave them in the chat and we'll answer them as they come along during moments of question time. Yeah, a lot of the reason why we do this series is simply just putting the information out there because, again, as Jalen said earlier, you know, the lack of education and lack of access to these resources is one of the main things that keeps Black trans femmes and women and folks at the blunt of being murdered and not being able to survive, especially during Rona. So please take in what you can. This will be up later. And we will, yeah, we're gonna get this done and do more of these.
I'd like to introduce Megan Dawson, who is an attorney with Lavender Rights Project. Megan's specialty is family law, but also is well versed in federal and state benefits, which is what we will be covering in this webinar, and we appreciate your time. So let's just get started.
So there is a federal program. It is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP for short. In Washington, it's called Basic Food. It's income-based, and essentially, if you are a single person, all of the numbers that I'm pulling throughout the presentation, I'm going to try to frame them as if you are a single person supporting yourself. I know that folks may have other housing arrangements. You may be in a relationship, or you may be married, or you may have a dependent. I'll address that to some degree, but these are the numbers that if you are living alone, supporting yourself, well, maybe not living alone, but your income is the only thing that you have to support you. These are the numbers that you'd be looking at. So it's about $1,354. That's the max that you can be receiving in income per month to receive the any amount of SNAP. SNAP does it can be reduced. So the max, I think, is $194 per adult. If you're closer to that $1,354 per month, you probably will receive less. You know, I've heard of people receiving $20 a month in SNAP if their incomes are a little bit higher. But in Washington, actually, anyone who's eligible for SNAP, even if it's a reduced amount, has actually been granted the full amount as of March, April, and May. Unclear if that's going to happen in June as well. But it is something that part of the state response is that if you can get any SNAP, you are going to get the maximum for your household. So that is one of the good programs that has arisen. One of the drawbacks of SNAP is it is not available for a lot of populations. So if you are an immigrant to this country and you don't have certain status, you may not be eligible for it. You can get it if you technically a legal alien, which I know is loaded, and I'm sorry I'm using that term, but it is a term of art. So it's a technical term. And so if you have a certain immigration status, you can receive SNAP, which is the federal version of the food program. The basic food restrictions are also, they did enact some new regulations for able-bodied adults, ABAWD, without dependents, who are basically on SNAP every month. So it's a recurring benefit, and they are delaying this requirement of working essentially about 20 hours per week. So they want you to work part-time. And if you're not working part-time, they are going to cap the monthly benefit at 30, I think it's at 3 months is the most you're eligible. I'm not sure, actually. I am unfortunately not, I can't remember that off the top of my head, but there is a maximum amount that they're going to allow. That's not currently the policy because it's been delayed due to the COVID related restrictions. So, but it is a new requirement, unfortunately, that they are going to require for individuals to continue receiving SNAP if they don't have dependents and they're not considered disabled by the state or federal government. There is a food assistance program, which is the sister program that the Washington state runs, and it does actually expand the availability for the food benefits to folks who don't have those statuses, who may not meet the federal requirements for legal status. And so there is an expanded group. But that program is called FAP. And then there's a WIC program, which is for basically anyone who has pretty young kids and is gestational. So they are either pregnant, they're feeding the child still with their body, and they may have children under 5. So there's I believe some additional funding, but it's a nutrition program, but it's part of the same program. So those are basically it in terms of food benefits. Washington State. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. When you're done, could you go back to the previous slide? There was a request to look at the previous slide really quick.
Sure. Thank you.
And just let us know when you are okay. Okay, great.
Great. Okay. So those are the food, at least benefits with a cash benefit amount. There are also a lot of food banks around Washington State, and I will say that is not. I came from the East Coast, and I did a lot of work with folks who were receiving benefits, and that was not something I saw very often. So Washington State does have a lot of support and they, this is a good place to live if you are lower income, or if your income is not very consistent. So yeah, the food banks, I would say, you can get usually referrals through the homeless programs that I'll cover at the very end of the program. But so the next section is going to be the cash benefits. I'm including tax benefits that are available, but that it doesn't always, tax benefits don't always result in cash. It depends on your household income, basically. So there's one that everyone is eligible for if you make a minimum amount of funds, your monthly income. You basically need to be under $15,000 in terms of income. So if you earn less than that each year, and I believe it goes up each year, then you are eligible for an earned income tax credit. Generally, if you're filing taxes, you should be able to, there's a lot of free programs that will prompt you to receive that tax credit, but it's a credit. So it means that it offsets tax that you might owe. So you could receive back tax that you would pay, that you had paid into the system automatically through your paycheck, but it doesn't always mean that it's actually going to be a benefit that you'll receive. It may just offset some of the tax that you would have otherwise owed to the government. So, and that's something that is available every year. Additionally, the federal government passed the CARES Act, which is what we are commonly referring to as the stimulus package, and that was earlier this year. This is a benefit basically where individuals receive $1,200, one payment, unfortunately just one payment, but you do have to file your tax return if you are a regular filer. So if you don't file a tax return, typically, then there are ways to receive the benefit even if you don't normally file, but the government essentially needs to see some kind of info related to your income or a 1099, but there are ways to prove that you are eligible for the benefit. They're automatically giving this to folks, so you don't actually have to apply for it. You just have to basically file your taxes. But there is a website, the IRS website does have a way for you to track, once you file your taxes, whether and where your payment is. So I know that they've only released some of the funds. There was a first wave. I believe there's going to be another wave coming up. And you can find out if your payment is going to be part of one of those funding waves. So essentially, you are able to file and receive this benefit through the end of 2020. So it's not too late if you haven't done it yet, not a problem. They are basically encouraging you to do it as soon as possible. But if you filed in 2018 or in 2019, you should be able to receive that benefit. There's a lot more. Is there a question?
Yes, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. Someone asked if it's possible to get the stimulus check if you're considered a dependent but over 17. And I also have a question after that.
Great. If you're considered a dependent, yes. So dependents are getting, so whoever would typically list you as a dependent, there is a $500 credit per child for folks who have dependents. So adults over age 18 are eligible for $1,200. And that does, that means, sorry, I forgot to say something important, which is this is if you're earning under $99,000 a year. So I think that's most of us. So earning less than $99,000 a year, but if you are earning close to that, you can get less than $1,200 a year, or for this lump payment. So, but yes, I believe that your parent or the person who's claiming you would be eligible for $500 automatically.
I think I read that as they're wondering about themselves, possibly not having contact with the adult. Sorry, the person who's claiming. Like, what happens in that case? Can this person who is listed as dependent on someone else's taxes receive the benefit? I think is that right?
I think that my understanding is that you would have to probably contact the IRS and let them know what your status is, that you are not, I mean, technically you're not a dependent if, you know, I mean, being able to claim someone as a dependent is assuming that you're providing them with housing, food, shelter, all those things that cost money. And so if they're claiming you and you're not actually a dependent, that would be a problem. I don't know if it's tax fraud, but there might be a way for you to reach out to them and let them know that you are an independent, not emancipated, but you are, you know, you're self-supporting. So I'm not sure if you're eligible. That's a great question, and it's pretty technical. What I could do is, if you want, I could go and find out the answer to that, but I haven't done the specific research on that.
And
so.
How do we get that? Can we just send out answers? And I think we can send out answers to the whole group email. And I think this is specifically for the special case of dependency for people over 17 who are still considered dependents for whatever reason. And so I think we can get that answer to them.
Totally.
Great.
And there was another question in the chat regarding basic food. Is there a resource that we can refer friends who are immigrants to that don't meet requirements to receive benefits?
Yeah, so I think that you can apply through the states. They have a program, and I'm gonna pull up that website towards the end of the presentation, but it's essentially a portal that allows you to check your eligibility and get the contact information for the specific program that you might be eligible for. So I believe it's called like My Benefits or something, like, I can't remember right off the top of my head, but I did put it in the presentation towards the end.
And I wanted to ask myself, because I know that I receive benefits from Social Security. So my experience was I'm a non-filer, so I filled out whatever on the IRS website. But I got on it before I was 17 and had to, in my early 20s, like go through a process of emancipating myself. I'm wondering if like that, like a person in that situation might, would they be able to get the stimulus payment is what I'm asking. Or would it go to their whoever it's paid to, the rep payee?
So my understanding is that the last information that they have, essentially whatever the IRS has for you on paper, is where they're going to send the check. And so that means that they could send the check to the wrong person for sure. And if you are on SSI, you automatically are going to receive the benefit. I think it's however you already received benefits. So if you're receiving direct deposit, they're just going to send it directly to your bank account. Otherwise, they'd send a check.
Thank you.
Okay. And are there any other questions about the tax-related benefits that I should cover, or should we move forward with the Social Security piece?
I think we can move forward. No one's popping up in the chat just yet.
Okay, great. And thank you for all your questions. They're really good questions. So I'm excited to go and research them.
I was typing in one more question and
Okay.
Okay, so they asked, how do the tax benefits work if someone were to have an addition to their household vis-a-vis adoption?
So if you are able to claim a dependent, each of those dependents, I believe you get $500 for the stimulus bill. So I believe that there is a way, if it's a new dependent, you could potentially file your 2019 taxes. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what that looks like. I think that they're asking you contact the IRS if you have a special circumstance like that, change in status, something like that. So I'd be happy to do the research and send that out later on.
Thank you, Megan. They said great.
Okay. Great. Wonderful. All right. So now we're going to cover Social Security. Social Security is the federal program that basically gives folks money to live off of. It's not tied to anything. It is, there are two different programs within the program that most people think of when they think of Social Security. One is called SSI, which stands for Supplemental Security Income. And the other is Ssdi, which stands for Social Security Disability Benefit. One is, well, I'm going to get into the differences later on, but you can apply for them in the same way. You apply for them generally at the same time if you're eligible for both of them. But this is a program intended for long-term conditions. So something that is not going to go away quickly, should last for a year or more. Generally the benefit is somewhere between I think last I saw it was $771 or so. It can vary depending on the state a little bit, but it's around $700, $800. Up to $3,000 is the largest benefit that I've seen paid to as SSDI. And you can receive both at once. One of the things that it is important to understand is SSDI is like an insurance benefit. It's considered almost like getting a paycheck. And so if you're eligible for SSDI, generally it's a higher benefit, but sometimes it's lower. Sometimes it's less than SSI. So it's less than that $700 I was talking about per month. And so if you are eligible for SSDI, but it only covers, let's say, a $500 payment each month, then you would be eligible to receive SSI as well. That would get you up to that SSI amount. And so you'd receive that supplement. Your max benefit would be whatever the SSI cap is for that month. The process for applying is pretty extensive. I'm sure that that's the case for a lot of these benefits, but the federal government makes you go through your work history, medical information. Generally, if you don't have a lot of information available, they will deny you for lack of information. So unfortunately, they rely really heavily on the evidence in the file. Some of that's supplied by you, some of it's supplied by your doctor, but it's a big process. So it does take quite a lot of time to get everything together. But the good news is if you apply online or by phone, you should be able to apply for both at once. And I don't think the Social Security offices are taking in-person applications right now, but they still have their phone available applications, and you can always apply online. So.
Someone had asked a question. I'm confused by the wording. Is there a resource for conditions under long-term conditions for qualifiers?
There is. So there is a way. So I'm going to talk about the ways in which you qualify. And there is they're called listings. I can send out a link to listings where you can look at what basically the medical threshold for automatically being considered disabled. So they list out every single possible disability that you could qualify for, and then they do spell out exactly what is required. And so if you don't meet the requirement under the listing, that puts you into a kind of the liminal zone where you would have to show how your combination of conditions or basically context, how that is disabling and prevents you from doing full-time work. So but I'm happy to share that that resource for the listings later. So the qualifications basically to be considered disabled by the Social Security agency are that you have to have a condition that is prevents you from engaging in what we call SGA, which is called substantial gainful activity. That's a technical term, and SGA is something that Social Security uses all the time to basically determine what is the amount of work that's considered to be full-time, essentially. So some people, SGA, it is actually a dollar amount, and each year it changes. And so they look at whether you can or you in the past have worked at SGA, and if your condition, whatever the medically determinable condition is, has lasted for a year or more, or is expected to last for a year or more. And that also could mean that if you pass away, you can also receive the benefit for the period of time where you basically had a condition that was expected to last for a year or more. So it's a long-term disability program that is intended to, really you're not intended to get the benefit right away. So the amount that you can earn that's considered to be SGA. So if you were to Google SGA, the government will list, the federal government will list the number each year, but right now it's about $1,260 per month, which is before tax. So if you earn more than that, you're considered to have earned at SGA. If you're earning less than that, then there are some other questions that they'd ask, but that's really, the issue is if you earn more than that each month, then the government thinks that you're able to sustain yourself and you don't need the benefit. So it's really a two-part question to qualify. Lots of folks make plenty of money with very severe disabilities, and so they want to know if you're able to work, and if you're not able to work, is it because of a long-term condition, and is it expected to change? The numbers are different for blind individuals. I think it's closer to $2,000 a month if you're considered to be blind under the Social Security rules, but it does increase every year, and it doesn't increase by that much. It's like, from 1260 to 1263. So it's generally, you know, it tracks pretty closely each month, but it's they raise it based on, I think, a cost of living adjustment. So one thing about being on disability is that a lot of people do sometimes want to work, continue to work, and you can do part-time work, which would mean that you would have to earn under the SGA amount on SSI or SSDI, but you have to report your earnings, and you have to, you just have to keep the Social Security Administration up to date. They can reduce your benefits. So if you were to earn, you know, $100 one month, they might reduce your SSI, or they won't reduce your SSDI, and I'll get into that later, but your SSI could be reduced if you have a regular job that, you know, allows you to basically self-support partially on a consistent basis. And these are all technical terms that the agency has, like, specific, you know, dates and lengths of time, how many hours, all those kinds of things are something they publish in their regulations. But it is possible to do some part-time work and not have your benefit cut off. There are special rules for people who are over 50. This presentation is primarily focused on folks who are under retirement age, so under age 62. There's a whole world of benefits once you become an older individual, but the special rules on Social Security really relate to what kind of jobs you might be able to get starting a new position, starting a new type of work, essentially. So the older you get, the easier it does become to qualify for Social Security, because they shockingly recognize that ageism is a consideration that affects people who are trying to return to work after, you know, having limitations in their physical and mental disabilities. So I could do an entire presentation on what those special rules are, but what I want you to know is that it does get easier as you get older to qualify. So are there any questions about these little nuggets of information?
We'll give a second.
Yeah, sorry. Something for me, I did in college a research paper on SNAP, and just how, like, there's so many things you have to fill out, and sometimes, you know, language barriers can be a thing, access to these, you know, places like DSHS and all of that stuff. Are there resources, organizations, along with Lavender Rights, that assist people in filling out forms, specifically to, like, with people with language barriers, maybe younger folks with disabilities that don't know how to talk about them, because, you know, there's that stigma as well. Yeah, that's just something I'm always just thinking about, like, how do we, you know, make all of this understandable for someone who really knows nothing about none of this?
Yeah, so the applications process, they do have applications in, I know King County has 16 different languages that they've had the application translated into. And I know that Social Security, they provide translation services. So you could absolutely apply for disability over the phone using a translator with the Social Security Administration's connections. So I think you just call the number, and then you press a number, and then they, you know, basically send you to a place where they may have to schedule a translator, but I think they might have folks actually on call, a translation service that can easily be accessed. So.
Sweet, thank you. Okay.
So, one of the things I do want to highlight in my practice of Social Security appeals, basically, I represented a lot of folks who didn't qualify based on the listing level, so didn't qualify during their first application, but they would have to appeal and get denied a second time, and then on their second appeal they could ask for a hearing in front of an administrative law judge. And so I've represented a lot of people in front of administrative law judges. And one of the things that is great about having a hearing in front of a judge is actually there's the human connection. So you will win cases because a judge sees you as a human being in person. So I highly recommend going forward with a hearing for most cases, but it is really hard to get on disability if you have a chronic manageable condition. So something like diabetes, for example, because there is a medication out there that works to theoretically give you, increase your quality of life and make it so that you should be able to work, and lots of people do work with that condition. You need to have another more severe or complicating issue that prevents you from working. And HIV and AIDS, because of the way the drugs have been developed, that's no longer something that most people can get on disability simply by being diagnosed with that condition. Bipolar is also one that's I've seen be really, really common, and it's pretty tricky to get on disability with a mental health disorder without having regular medical interventions, which I know that that's a huge barrier for a lot of people. And then there are people out there that are never going to be able to access disability, even though they certainly qualify, because of the paper trail you have to have. So this is a program that doesn't reach people in the margins. It reaches people who are somewhat able to be in and out of society's required structures. So and engage with systems that are violent. So that's one thing that I do want to stress. The way that the agency looks at compliance is what they often refer to it as, which is seriously messed up. But basically, your doctors, if they want you to be on a medication, for example, and you don't like it, or a lot of folks, for example, with bipolar, are expected to take lithium, and there can be serious side effects and serious legitimate reasons not to want to take that medication, or just being unable to afford that medication. I've seen people turn down for lack of compliance, essentially, because of those issues, which is so awful. And that's a lot of the time where I think having a hearing in front of a judge, you can explain a lot of those issues. But that is one of the ways in which you have to prove that you've listened to your doctor, you've followed it, recommendations of this doctor to a T, and your condition is still persistent enough that you are unable to do full-time work. So another issue I do want to highlight is they do also consider any kind of substance abuse if there's evidence in the record. So really, if your doctor knows about it, if it's something that there's been a medical, any kind of medical intervention, if you've reported it to your doctor or a mental health provider, then if it's in the record, a judge and the Social Security Administration will see those records. So they do look at drugs and alcohol. I've won cases for many people with active addictions, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to be approved. What they look at is whether your condition is essentially independent of a drug and alcohol issue. So if they can't tell whether your use of drugs and alcohol is making your condition worse, or if it's making it better, or if there's just no data essentially from a period when you weren't engaged in those activities, then the agency basically throws their hands up in the air and they say, we can't tell what's the underlying condition and what's substance abuse, and so we are going to deny this. So it has meant that a lot of folks who have especially mental health conditions, who use drugs and alcohol as medication supplementally, that they have been denied access to this benefit that they should receive. And I've told many people, like, you have to go and basically have a period of sobriety so that you can show the agency that you still have the same issues regardless of whether you're using drugs and alcohol or not. And then you have a much stronger chance of getting approved. So those are some of the really tough things about the program. I will say that it's gotten tougher over time. It used to be pretty easy to get approved if you went in front of an administrative law judge, but they really cracked down, and it's obviously a political system. So whether they think you're disabled enough can be really, it's not immune from all of the ways in which systems are racist, ableist, et cetera. So unfortunately, they do a little bit better with ableism, which is, which is what they should do. But they're still, it's still a legal process. It's basically paperwork that makes you prove that you are sick enough. So I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any questions about some of those issues.
I'm wondering about sort of the ins and outs of a lot of folk in our community do sex work. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about both the new sort of lifestyle of having to return back to the streets because of sort of restrictions by the federal government on online dating, and them having access to like this whole process, in addition to reporting income, and trouble that they might get in there. But of course not being able to, fully disclose what needs to be, what's being asked to be disclosed.
Right. So I will say that I have absolutely had an administrative law judge question someone who had engaged in sex work for most of her working history, and asking questions about, how much certain things cost and what her regular income was. So the agency does want to know about things that are under the table, illegal activities. I will say that this process is protected by HIPAA. And so these proceedings are not going to be public. The only people that can see what's in them is the folks in Social Security Administration. So I would say that it is generally a safer place to disclose that information, but lots of people are out of work for all kinds of reasons. And so essentially you'd be only eligible for SSI if your work has not been reported, or if the work and income you've had has not been reportable over the course of your work history. So that's generally the issue, is that there's no way to prove you don't pay taxes, so there's no way to prove that you earned that income. But that is something that you may have to talk to a judge about, and explain that that's, work that you have done in the past, and that you're not able to do that work anymore. So it's kind of a tricky issue, but it is something that the courts, the agency has definitely seen plenty of.
Can you explain what HIPAA is?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Sorry. Yeah, HIPAA is the Healthcare Information Protection Act. That's not the actual acronym. It's close to it, but it's basically the federal law that protects people's private healthcare information, and it protects what is shared without your consent, essentially. So it limits, and the law restricts what doctors can do, how they can store information, how they have to, what kind of permissions and authorizations they have to receive before they can share your records with anyone. And so HIPAA is absolutely in play, and the agency does take it very seriously. So your records are protected. You can access them. It's not something that, I've never heard of someone having the proceedings in Social Security used against them in another legal capacity. For example, in a criminal action. I've never heard of it. It doesn't mean it's not possible, but I think it would be pretty difficult to access those transcripts for that purpose. And yeah, that's a really good legal question. So, but HIPAA is protective, and your information is essentially sealed. So
It's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Google, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay, well,
which process is protected by HIPAA? Applying and seeking eligibility for SSI, Ssdi is going before a judge protected and disclosing employment history that doesn't directly relate to medical info. So there was a lot of info in that. I don't know if you're able to see that question in the.
Oh, okay. I probably can. I just my screen is the presentation. So I can answer some of that question. Anything where your medical information is being discussed is protected. So going in front of a judge is protected. Applying your application for disability, the initial application, any contact you're having with the agency, they're asking you to, list medications you're on, describe treatment that you've had, and they actually go forward and contact your doctors if you don't have an attorney, or you're not providing those records yourself. They require you to essentially authorize them to access that information as part of their application process. And so them having that information everything is protected. So the only thing that isn't sometimes protected, I would say, is some of the employment history. They do look at what your previous work has been, and they have someone basically classify it using a dictionary of occupational titles. So basically they have a list of all the jobs out there, that exist in the U.S. economy. And so there is testimony that sometimes you'd be giving that isn't health related, that could be accessed by this vocational expert in order to determine some of what your previous jobs were. So I don't think that is necessarily protected by HIPAA, but pretty much the entire rest of your application is going to be protected. So yeah, it is really buttoned up. It's hard to access those records unless it's you.
I have some questions about whether or not those records could be subpoenaed for like legal prosecution, particularly for sex offender work or even tax evasion.
So that is a really good question. I will say that certainly if Social Security finds out that you, for example, reported income and received a credit that you didn't actually so a lot of times people have, I think, to get the earned income tax credit, I've seen folks report income that they actually didn't earn. And so technically that's tax fraud. Theoretically, they could report you. But I think that, yeah, I think that they're not, I'm really not sure about that. I'm gonna have to do some research.
Thank you.
Yeah, but in terms of subpoenas, I really don't think that those would go forward if it's HIPAA protected, even if it's information the government might be interested in. So I really doubt it could be used for prosecution purposes. And so my inclination is that I doubt it could also be used for tax fraud. But I have seen the agency, so I've seen folks who are on Social Security who either are in the application process or they've been approved, have the agency essentially review their case. And I've seen them send out private investigators to basically watch people and then write a report for the administrative law judge that investigates what they're actually able to do. I haven't seen it in a lot of cases, but I mean, honestly, it seems like a huge waste of money to me, but I have seen it done. And so that is something that there are ways in which the agency might check up on you, but essentially what you do with Social Security stays with Social Security, especially related to your health information. Any other questions? These are such good questions, y'all. All right, I'm gonna move along to a more specific information about SSI. So SSI is the benefit that functions like a welfare program. And so it's income dependent. It is around $700 a month or so. Kids can get on SSI under age 18. Your parent or your guardian has to apply for you. And they do look at your household income. So if there is no household income, for example, then your benefit could be up to $771, I think is the amount. I'm just going to say that is the amount that it is presently. I'm not totally sure that that's it in Washington, but that is the maximum benefit for SSI. But sometimes people receive less in SSI. For example, if they have a household, you know, a spouse or a partner, or someone that the agency considers to be part of their household, who works, for example, or who receives SSI themselves. So the benefit can be less than that, but the max is going to be about $771 per person. It is not taxable, and that means that it also can't be garnished. And so your benefit, if you're eligible for SSI, that's, you get that money. It's something that it being on SSI often qualifies you for a lot of other programs, SNAP, housing, things like that. There's a lot of programs in Washington, but being on SSI is something that it can change month to month depending on what your household income looks like. So I skipped, there we go. I see why I skipped a slide. I was giving you information that I meant to show you. So yeah, so basically this is the only federal built program that allows folks to have income cash benefit in all 50 states and in US territories. One really unfortunate part of this is that they do cap your assets at $2,000. So you can never have more than $2,000 in your bank account, or you don't qualify for SSI anymore. So it's really messed up. It means that basically if you're on SSI, you can't save money. You just can't. You would have to put it in a, trust or something like that where you had no access to it. So it's a tricky issue, but they really don't want you to have, they really want you to be financially drained in order to receive this benefit. Another issue is that if you get married and your spouse is also receiving SSI, they cut your benefits down so dramatically. It's I think criminal. Basically the penalty is that you as a couple your household essentially will receive around $1,100 a month rather than what you could have individually been receiving, which is much closer to $1,500 a month. So that's a big gap in income, unfortunately. So a lot of times people who are on SSI and they're with someone who's also on SSI, I don't get married because it will be a big problem. And sometimes people don't realize that, and then they do get married. And so then they have to get divorced so that they can get their full benefit again. So that's one of my big beefs with the benefit. But generally, you're eligible for all the income-based programs that you would be eligible for if you didn't have income. So, a lot of people receive SNAP, SSI, housing indefinitely. So, and that just never changes. So, any questions about SSI specifically?
Yeah. Well, I have two things. The first thing is more of I believe the $1,200 from the stimulus check does not count against SSI income, as far as I know.
Right, it doesn't.
Right, okay.
That's correct, yes.
And then the other question Jalen was asking is, can Lavender Rights Project help set up a trust if someone is on SSI and trying to save money?
Yes, and we have actually done that. That's something that earlier this year we had a case come in like that, and there's a special trust that I think you can set up for essentially your family members or whoever you would like to. And the answer was there is a special program for this. If you want to basically try to save some of your SSI to pass on or to make available to someone else. But as long as I think you're not accessing the money, you are able to do that. And I think it's a fairly straightforward process, but we could definitely help you figure out the answer to that question.
Thank you. And someone else posted it doesn't seem like a question, but like more of a comment, that they had a friend who wanted their partner to serve on a board with them, but the stipulation was marriage, tried to get the bylaws reworded so that wasn't a stipulation. So both her partner and her wouldn't lose the SSI, and that was a silly rule.
Yeah, it's really unfair.
Mhm.
And I mean, I can only guess as to why the benefit is different. I guess they think that housing is the biggest chunk and that you are living with the person you're married to, which is a ridiculous assumption. But it is definitely one of the I think cruelest things about the benefit is the limitations on people's person's abilities to get married, so and retain their benefit that they should that they're eligible for. Okay, so
We've got,
great. More questions?
yes, could one have a civil union recognized and still receive SSI rather than a marriage?
So as long as you're not married, I think a civil union does not count as being married.
Okay.
I think the federal government, it's really a tax filing status. So if you can file as a married couple and they consider your household to be your spouse, I mean, I've had and I've counseled people to tell Social Security that, your partner is your roommate and, you owe rent to them, even if during the process of applying, they've been covering those costs for you. I tell people, basically say that, you are self-sustaining. You have to pay for your own way, even if you've leaned on others in the interim, because a lot of times people will apply and get back pay, and they could reduce your back pay if they think that your household had more money in the past. And so definitely don't want the agency to think that, so that you can get your full benefits. So
Thank you.
mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Just give it another second to see if anybody pops up in the chat.
The question that I had around the civil union recognized received under SSI, and I think it might be something that could come up in Dusty's discussion later around estate planning, was, say a person is young and married now, and when they're like 50, 60, as their body's deteriorating, or they were to get in an accident that qualifies them for Ssdi, for them to still be recognized in the marriage under civil law without it being like the marriage is holding them back from receiving what they could, essentially, if that makes sense.
I don't know that I fully understand the question.
Since it's like, would you have to get divorced to receive the full benefit, or could one still be married as they get older and both be on Social Security?
So the Social Security that, so basically anyone who's on SSI, as they age, they essentially put you into the other program, the retirement benefit program, automatically. So I don't think that, yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on your household unit. But being married, for example, with Social Security, if you're married to someone for 10 years and you never worked during that period, or you worked so little, you don't qualify for the other benefit, which is what we'll get into in a minute. Then those basically, they take your spouse's income and they treat it like it's your income. So you could qualify for that other benefit. And that's really for folks who have stayed home with families and had a single income earner. So, I mean, I think that the view on marriage is pretty black and white in the eyes of Social Security. So,
Definitely understand that. It's interesting, since earlier in this benefits discussion, I was thinking to myself, I don't make an income, but my partner makes enough that it's less than what we're making, but it's enough that we don't qualify necessarily for low income.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks in that liminal zone, unfortunately, and yeah, I'll get into that a little bit later. So, but I think in the interest of time, I might continue on with the presentation so I can try to cover everything I've got left. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is Ssdi, which we've already talked about to some degree. It's your eligibility is essentially it's like an insurance program. So when you pay Social Security tax in to the federal government, they give you a credit, and as long as you're paying a certain amount, and I think your earnings have to be around $1,000 each month, or $3,000 every quarter. As long as you're earning about that much, you qualify for a credit for that quarter, and it really the way that those credits work determine your eligibility in the future. So it's considered insurance. It runs like private insurance. So depending on how long you worked and paid money into the system, that is what determines how long you have that insured status into the future. And so generally it's about 5 years or so after you stop working that your disability insurance runs out, and it's called a date last insured, DLI. It's a really important term if you're looking at Ssdi. But for folks who have kind of more patchy income that isn't always consistent, they look at basically over about a 10-year period. If you were reporting earning, or if you had credits for about half that time, then you would get your benefit basically 5 years out. So it's a really complicated process. Social Security does all of it, and it's all about what you pay into Social Security tax. So your benefit with Ssdi can vary significantly, but it's usually it tracks with essentially what your earnings were over the course of your work history. So if you made, $100,000 a year for 20 years and you paid taxes on that the whole time, that's kind of where you're looking at a benefit closer to $3,000 a month. And that's the largest I've ever seen. And that's because there is a cap on how much Social Security. So I think if you earn more than 125,000, there's a cutoff essentially where any income you earn over that, you don't pay Social Security tax on anymore. So for those high earners out there, that's why there's a max basically. So Social Security with Ssdi, it's essentially treated as you earned it, you receive it. They don't care what your assets are. They don't care what your resources are. They don't care if your spouse works. They don't care if you win the lottery. So that means that you can still own property and receive that benefit. You don't have to sell that asset in order to qualify the way you do with SSI. One tricky thing about Ssdi is you don't receive a benefit for the first 5 months they think you're eligible for it, which means a lot of times when people are applying, if they're receiving back pay, the first 5 months of that back pay, they just don't get. And it's this I'm assuming a weird rule that was negotiated when the law was enacted, where, you know, that's how they came to an agreement with the legislation. But I think it's meant to treat people who are eligible for SSDI as if they should have savings that amounts to 5 months of living costs or something. So they basically say, we're not going to pick up the bill, even though we think you were disabled. So it seems it's pretty shady, but it is how the law works. Unfortunately, the other thing about SSDI is you're eligible for Medicare after you've been on it for 2 years. And so it's, it's automatic. You get enrolled. You can apply for Medicare. And so that's generally a better healthcare program. There are more doctors available. They cover a little bit more. So most folks do opt to get on Medicare as well as remain on Medicaid. But the funny thing about SSDI is they do tax you on it. So it's like getting a paycheck. They will tax you. It can be garnished. It can, if you owe debt, child support, for example. So it is, you know, it's a trickier one, but it's basically like earning an income. So that's kind of how it works. Are there any questions about SSDI?
We may have to hold questions. We're
Okay.
getting to a place of wrap up.
Great, I can move forward. So the next benefit is the state cash assistance. This is a state benefit that basically, if you qualify as a certain kind of family, or you have a young child, there are TANF benefits, temporary assistance for needy families. This is the federal program, but it's administered by the state of Washington. They call it Work First, which basically means, you have to work if you can. I don't know exactly what they require, but there's an income cap of $6,000 in assets, and basically you can't have more than $10,000 available in your vehicle's equity. So you can have a car, but it just can't be a nice car or fancy car. Families can only get it for 60 months. So that's the max that you're eligible to receive it. But it is, a pretty decent cash benefit. I think it's typically around $500 a month, depending on your household size. So TANF is the federal program. There's a sister program, which is called State Family Assistance. It's for folks who don't fall into the TANF categories. There's another program, ABD, which is essentially the temporary disability program, that while you're applying for disability, if you haven't heard back, you can apply for this benefit, and the agency will basically do a determination to figure out if they think you're disabled. And if they do think that, then they'll give you a supplemental cash payment of about $197 a month. There's also a refugee cash assistance program, which if you qualify, basically you've been brought to the U.S. Under certain statuses, they can give you cash for the first 8 months that you're in the United States. And then there's another program, I'm not going to go into much detail about that, but there's a pregnant women's assistance program. And I apologize for all of the, gendered stuff, but those are the names of the programs. So this is, so those are some of the ways in which the federal government and the state government, Washington, provide cash to folks who are needing it. So the next thing I'm going to cover is medical. Washington has a law that mirrors the federal version of this. It's basically medical leave. So if you were to get sick, if someone in your household were to get sick, if you were to have a baby, things like that, that are temporary in nature, Washington now has a law that basically allows you to pay tax, a very small tax. I think it's like 0.25% of your pay. So it's a really small tax. You pay it into this program quarterly, or your employer collects it. But if you are self-employed, you can pay in and be eligible for this program. You have to pay in for 3 years before you can qualify. So essentially, I think the first year they allowed people to pay in was 2018. The first year they allowed anyone to receive the benefit was 2019. So you'd be eligible for benefits if you started in 2018 and 21. So, and that would be the first year you'd be eligible to apply. So it's basically an application. It's basically the state's version of a short-term disability program. The federal version is unpaid. They really just guarantee your job doesn't go away under certain conditions. But you cannot get unemployment and this medical leave paid to you at the same time. That's very important. I'm not going to cover any other unemployment issues, but that's this is a really great benefit. And there's information at paidleave.washington.gov. They have a lot more answers. So I think we're going to hold questions and keep going. So in terms of Medicaid, that's the main benefit in this state. Medicare, you're eligible if you are on Ssdi or over a certain age. And then the CHIP version, the CHIP is basically the children's healthcare, which is Medicaid for kids, essentially. And so they're all called the same thing. It's all Apple Healthcare in this state. You can apply through your medical providers. They've done a really good job in this state, I think, of making sure that people who are eligible are able to maintain that insurance. But there is an income cap. So if you make more than $14.68 a month, and you're a single individual, you can qualify, or sorry, you lose your eligibility. And so so if your income goes up above that, if it kind of fluctuates around that number, generally they're kind of lax about that, kicking you off immediately. But if you earn more than $14.68 per month, they did expand Medicaid eligibility in this state, and so Obamacare would help you with a healthcare subsidy, which is paid directly through your to the medical provider as a credit. So it's a tax credit technically, but it's something that you can receive that's paid so that your premium is supplemented. And the way that the state has responded to COVID is they're basically giving people health care if they ask for it. It's a lot harder to kick people off. Well, not a lot harder, but they're making it harder. And then they are essentially you can appeal, and they're expediting it, and they're just trying to make sure that people stay covered given this the COVID stuff. They're also they've made it easier to qualify. So if you miss the enrollment period, they are allowing you to apply. They basically created a special enrollment period related to COVID to try and make sure that everyone has some kind of health coverage in the state. So, and then I already talked about Obamacare. In other states, I will say that many other states did not expand Medicaid. And if you basically, Medicaid is not available in a lot of other places, and it's really, really bad for folks. I'm not going to go into any more detail about that, but let's talk about housing. So I will say that there's a lot of homelessness grants out there, and they are administered in each county. They can vary widely, but essentially the way that you get on any kind of housing assistance in this state is you have to apply through the county. They have social workers. It's essentially a homelessness prevention program, and you have to go through some screenings. They will refer you to other programs that you're eligible for. But yeah, I'm going to give you a website at the end that can help direct you, depending on the county that you're in, exactly where you need to go to see if you qualify. And I know they did a lot of expanding housing to try to make sure that people are housed related to COVID, and that they're able to isolate and stay safe. So I know that the at least Seattle is housing people, and I think they're trying to do that statewide, but it's kind of a piecemeal approach. So there is a Department of Commerce has an Office of Supportive Housing. I just wanted to give you that that website because they do help people who have long-term substance abuse issues get into housing, but it's just one of those programs. It's an example of one of them. I'm going to cover this. So this is the Housing and Essential Needs Program. This basically is a referral program that if you are considered to be unable to work for 90 days because of a disability, it's a short-term disability kind of supplemental program. So they can give you some rental assistance. They can help you with move-in costs. Sometimes they give you cleaning items or travel passes, bus passes. But it's essentially a program that is run through those homelessness prevention programs that are county-based. And it's something that that essentially the state does to help folks who are either applying for disability or trying to get stabilized. It gives them the opportunity to have some more assistance. And if you're paying your own rent, I think it's around $339 a month for an individual. Last slide is the utilities assistance. So there's a federal grant where you can qualify to help your heating basically be paid. It is paid directly to the heating provider, and so you can apply once per winter cycle essentially, and it's a really great federal program. There are a couple of Seattle and local versions of that can help you with your utility bills. But there is a really great website, this website, WashingtonConnection.org, where you can actually, there's several places where you can just fill out your very limited information, and they tell you, kind of steer you to what you may qualify for in terms of state benefits.
Megan, thank you.
Okay,
I'm going to cut you off because we do have a captioner. We need to give them time, a little bit of a break before our next webinar. Is there any really final things that really needs to go out? Do you have a final slide you want to put up while we wrap up?
I was just going to have information linked to the Black Trans Task Force contact information. Thank you.
And then Megan, thank you so much for your wisdom, and you can follow up with us. Any questions that we weren't able to answer because we were rushed in the end, to that email, and we'll get in touch with Megan. We'll also follow up with more questions. When we post this recording, and make it public. We'll add those questions and some resources.